Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Sean Gazala. I'm the behavioral health lead at the Staten Island Partnership for Community Wellness, and we're holding this event today on behalf of House of Community and TYSA to talk about substance use and how it impacts Black, Indigenous, and people of color in this community, and what resources and strategies are out there in the community to support your young one. And Dr. Morgan, please introduce yourself.
Yes, good evening, everyone. I'm Aaliyah Morgan. I am working with House of Community, which is a community service organization established on here on Staten Island approximately 5 years ago, and addressing some unmet needs of the community. And particularly, we wanted to speak to the issue of youth substance abuse, uh, particularly in BIPOC community members. And this is the second of a two-part series addressing these issues. We talked about our last meeting. We spoke so sorry, on trauma and its effect on our community, and they were going to speak about uh, substance abuse and the issues of self-medication and challenges that our youth are facing. And I thank everyone for being on board, and hopefully we will be able to address some questions and answers at the end. And again, thank you very much. And back to Sean.
Thank you, Dr. Morgan. So I didn't say, so just want to give folks background. TYSA is a community coalition of over 50 organizations, and we work collectively to improve youth mental health rates and lower decreasing substance use rates in the community, which is under this umbrella of behavioral health. And we partnered with House of Community just to build on Dr. Morgan's points, because we wanted to sort of hone in on how these issues impact people of color in the community. And tonight we'll be discussing substance use and its impacts. And our panel sharing with us this evening is Jasmine Rivera, the Deputy Director of SIPCW and the TYSA Project Director, Robert Power, the Clinical Program Director at Community Health Action of Staten Island, and Jasmine Robinson, community activist and female 61st Assembly District Leader. So thank you to the three of you for joining us this evening. And I'm going to hand it to Jasmine Rivera to start us off.
Hey everyone, it's nice to have two Jasmines on one panel. So like Sean said, I'm Jasmine Rivera. I'm the Deputy Executive Director of the Staten Island Partnership for Community Wellness. We're a public health not-for-profit on Staten Island that does a lot of different stuff, but our buckets of work are really around coalition building and community organizing around issues like substance use, mental health, chronic disease prevention. So TYSA is one of those projects that we support, like Sean said. And Sean, if you can pull up those slides, we'll share some info with you folks. So I'm going to show you some data and talk to you about the issue. I don't want to bore you, but I just want you to kind of like see and understand the scope of the issue. Again, the data is a little bit older because that's how data sources work. And I know it can be frustrating for folks, but it's interesting when we think about an issue like opioids specifically, but even other drugs that have been framed as an issue among middle-class white folks or a certain type of kid. And it's not that way, right? And the data will show us that. So again, we're talking about Staten Island a lot right now. On Staten Island and in the nationwide conversation, we've been thinking about opioids as a middle-class white issue. People also often frame it as like, it's the child you wouldn't expect. They were an athlete, they were an honor student. Like, what does that mean, right? Like every child matters, every person's life matters. So it being a certain type of kid was making it seem like it was a white kid, right? And that's why we should care about them, even though we've had substance use issues in all communities forever. So this is just some data showing those things. So Sean, can you go forward? So this is a campaign that we developed as TYSA a year ago, actually. I think our kickoff for our In Our Backyard event was last October. So for us, it was really important to do our due diligence as a coalition of going back and disaggregating data. So basically that means not just looking at the population level stuff, which showed us that it was mostly middle class white folks dying. It was like really digging in to see what was going on and what communities this mattered in. So we saw in this data, and you could just read the picture, right? If you don't want to look at bar graphs, because I know data is annoying for some folks, but we see that Black or Hispanic and Hispanic folks were about twice as likely to report cocaine usage compared to white students. And this is the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, which is a study that's done nationwide, but also done at the New York City level. And this is Staten Island specific data, right? So again, when I think about cocaine, I'm thinking about a certain type of person, right? Because of how movies portray it. The Wolf of Wall Street, it's business folks. It's like people partying. It's often white people, but we're seeing that our Black and Hispanic students and youth are often using at higher rates than white students. You go forward, Sean. Oh, there's a couple. Oh, okay. I was like, I ran through it already. Okay, and then we see that in some 2019 data, again, in this high school student sample, that 1 in 10 Hispanic or Latino and Black and African Staten Island high school students reported using heroin at least once in their lifetime. So again, we're talking about opioids, right? This is a drug that we were not thinking about in Black and brown communities. This is a drug we were thinking about in white communities, but we're seeing that folks are reporting 1 in 10 folks are reporting using heroin at least once in their lifetime. And this is high school, so that's heroin, right? That's a scary thing to see. Can you go forward, Sean? So then again, we're seeing that, and this is a data set also thinking about young adults. So this is 18 to 25 now, not high school students, but in this age group, 18 to 25, Black youth were twice as likely to use painkillers and 3 times more likely to use heroin than the average, right? So if you look at these little bars, we see that white folks were at 2.2% in past 30-day prescription pain reliever use, and that Black folks were at 5.2%. And a coalition like us was patting ourselves in the back, right? Because we've seen prescription drug rates go way down in this age group. We're like, oh, it used to be 6% and now it's 2%. We're doing so great. But when you look at the data, who's driving up the average? And it was actually Black folks. And that's not something that we are often thinking about. Similar to heroin, right? We're seeing this 4.6% use in Black folks compared to 1.7 average. So not a lot of folks reporting heroin use, but a higher group is Black and African Americans. You also see that Native American Pacific Islander bar is pretty high, but that was a very small sample, so it's not very reliable. It's like a handful of folks. Sean, you want to go forward? And I think this is our last data slide. Again, I don't want to bore you with data, but thinking about the young adult sample again, Black folks were twice as likely to use benzodiazepines or tranquilizers. So that's something like a Xanax. We hear about people like popping blues. This is, again, something that we're not necessarily thinking about in Black communities or in my community, right? But we're seeing that this 6.4% rate is twice as high as the average at 2.9%. And we're seeing that white folks are coming in at 1.8% of self-reported use. So again, why does this matter? It's about, oh, I'm sorry, I have one more, but it's about national conversations and about how resources flow. But again, we were seeing in 2018, of 114 overdose deaths on Staten Island, fentanyl was involved in 70% of them. So fentanyl is really scary. I'm sure if you hear about opioids or talk about it at all, you know that fentanyl is super potent. It takes much less for someone to overdose. It takes more naloxone of that opioid overdose antidote to revive folks. And then we're hearing things, I know when we were talking about planning this event, Jamila was saying that we're hearing in some cases that people are hearing about fentanyl and marijuana in different spaces, right? So if you're buying press pills off the street or heroin or cocaine off the street, fentanyl can be laced in it. And I think Robert will touch on this way more than I will, so I won't speak to that much. But knowing that in these overdose rates, this is something that's driving them up way high. So back to, again, why this conversation matters around Black and brown folks and Black and Indigenous people of color in general. So community wellness is drug prevention. I feel like sometimes we have these conversations like, how do we stop drugs? We have to do the DARE program. Do people remember that? It was bad. It was not good. The outcomes are not good. Or it's like, we have to arrest people. We have to lock up the drug dealers. We have to do all of these things. Great. Okay, those might be some options, but the reason why we have substance use issues in most cases are because of community conditions. And we think about adverse childhood experiences. Dr. Morgan talked about our last conversation that was about trauma and mental health and people of color. Things like parental incarceration, community violence, so witnessing violence in your community, if your parent used substances or had a substance use problem, if your parent had mental health issues, These are these ACEs, right? These adverse childhood experiences, and they make someone more likely to develop a drug problem later in life or have other chronic disease or mental health issues as well. And I say that because it's not to scare people about trauma, but it's to say that these issues are often bigger than us as individuals, right? So it's so stressful. People, like, if you're a parent and your kid is struggling with substance use, like, it's my fault. It's not your fault. There are so many things going on in life. There are so many issues that are happening that are outside of your control. There are things that you can control, but these are bigger issues than us. These are systemic issues, right? So I think many of us know, right, that economic prosperity means lower violence. So communities that have more economic vitality, there are people have jobs, they're employed, they're gainfully employed, they can pay their bills, they're less likely to have violence in those communities. Those conditions make it easier for you to parent. If you're not making a lot of money, you have a very stressful life, you get home, your kids are yelling, right? Like, it's hard to cope in those situations. It's hard for us as parents. So better outcomes come when we are able to, like, thrive in that stability. So even though these issues are systemic, there are some things that we can do to contribute to wellness as a community, as parents, as caregivers, as concerned adults. So we can use your voice if you can. So I don't like to put the onus on people too much, right? There's a lot that we can do, but if people aren't listening to us, that doesn't make it your fault. But if you can advocate, if you can be a part of community conversations, if you can talk to your elected officials, if you can talk to your school, those are all things that you can do to support community wellness, because that is drug prevention. You can also build your prevention knowledge. So learning about the substances that kids are using in general and learning about the substances that are affecting Black and Brown youth. We can't have a conversation about it unless you know about it. So now that you're here today, you know it's an issue. Build more of your tools, build your knowledge, look out for the signs and symptoms. TYSA has other workshops on these things. But we also recently developed this family commitment. So it's basically an informational sheet that talks to you about what substances are happening in youth lives and talks to you about some prevention efforts, right? So resources in your school, locking and storing medications, locking and storing alcohol and other drugs and cannabis in your homes, all of these different things. And then committing to talking to your kids, because conversations about prevention aren't just about drugs. Like, hey, don't do drugs. How was your day? What are the stressors in your life right now? How can I support you as a parent? How can we problem solve and work on these things together? What do you need? All of those conversations are drug prevention conversations. You don't have to just be talking about the drugs people are using. And then you can join TYSA. We're a coalition. So we are always looking for more voices, more advocates, more people with lived experience to talk about what they've gone through so that we can think about brainstorming solutions together. But I think the thing, again, that I want folks to take away from this, and we'll hear more about it later, is that our children, Black and Brown children, are using these drugs that we were not thinking were happening in communities before it. And again, until you name something, you can't work on it. So now that we know, we need to work on prevention together. I'm done.
Thank you, Jasmine, for that background and beginning us off. Robert, I'm gonna hand it to you. Love to hear what you'd like to add.
Thanks, Jasmine. It seems like we're right on the same page. I'm going to share my screen, and part of it is, for me, is understanding the effects that substance abuse has on these Black and Brown children and youth. You know, part of it is that our youth are already subject to extreme biases, and these biases increase 20 times when they have a substance use disorder. And implicit bias, as we know, is a well-studied phenomenon. You know, the phrase has come very popular these days, and it talks about the way people have unconscious thoughts, attitudes, beliefs towards people, both positive and negative. We all have implicit biases. We all have our own choices and beliefs. But the challenges arise when we allow our biases to form the foundations of our decisions. Now, also with microaggressions, and these are very small verbal or physical interactions that may not have malicious intent, but they emotionally scar youth by hearing them. You know, microaggression behaviors are a direct result of implicit racial bias. Common themes are, you're not like other Black or brown kids. What are you? Your name is too hard to pronounce. You're so articulate. Instead of just saying and giving or identifying that person as the behavior, they identify these individual children as their background. And implicit racial bias and associated microaggressions have been shown to negatively impact black and brown children with providers, treatment, decisions, quality of care, treatment adherence, and health outcomes. And a comprehensive, multi-layered approach is necessary to actually address the misuse of substances and by addressing addiction faced by these youth. Some speculate that substances are a way of coping in the absence of community healing when a youth have been traumatized as like their parents with decades of violence, poverty, and neglect. So the best way to approach a youth that's black and brown when they're struggling in this type of area is to have a holistic approach. It's not just about the substance itself. It's about for these black and brown kids, addiction is embedded in the community context marked by limited opportunities, de-investment in the area, economic de-investment, violence, integrational trauma, and research has confirmed that strong neighborhood cohesion and social size are correlated with lower drug rates and negative consequences. So also these stats provide us with information on how addiction is beyond scientific findings. 30% of the black and brown community in this state is underemployed. These stats play into a sense of hopelessness. And these black and brown adults, they're working full time, but they're not making a livelihood. This drives the myth that this sense of hopelessness can only be fixed by substance abuse. And more importantly than that, that this sense of hopelessness incorporates and drives the prevalence of gun violence and domestic violence, which is prevalent in these areas. Now, the reason for this holistic approach tells us that beyond this scientific level, there's rates of involvement for these black and brown youth is increased rates of criminal justice interaction with the criminal justice system, the mediocrity of just everyday life, the lack of support and engagement in these neighborhoods. All these have actually affected the outcomes of black and brown youth who want to some type of addiction treatment. Part of this too is negative representation and stereotype and stigmas. We as black and brown people, especially youth with substance abuse, they're double stigmatized by the minority and their drug use. So negative images of black and brown youth will also contribute to their mistreatment, discrimination, and harsh punishment instead of treatment and put them into recovery services. There's no forgiveness, well, there's very little forgiveness for a black and brown youth who has committed some type of minor substance abuse offense. Today, in this black and brown community, leaders even indicate that words such as crack, an opioid epidemic, or crisis, these are negative stereotypes, and it puts black and brown youth on high alert and very defensive, and they become fear of incarceration if they want to go for help or just give people the truth about their situations. So we have to understand also that their parents or their parents' parents may have suffered some type of trauma, and that some of these uses can be intergenerational as well as polyuse. And for many black and brown families in the US, misuse is passed on from one generation to another. And there's more than one substance being used in some cases, and households are misusing together. And in this community with high poverty and economic investment, intergenerational and polyuse are not uncommon, nor is it unique for just the black and brown community. For many of these poor and low income communities, using or selling drugs is a means of survival. So understanding that intergenerational polysubstance use are common among these impoverished communities, we have to kind of separate them from some of the behaviors that hinder their progress. But disentangling these behaviors of a person's social network, telling them that something that their parents told them was right, that was actually wrong, is very challenging because now we're challenging their belief system. But we have to be prepared to not only replace the belief and the behavior with some alternative that will create in a positive result. You know, like society in general, Black and brown youth have a lack of understanding of how substance use disorder is really a disease, and the high risk of opioid disorder from prescription misuse is tremendous. And within all communities, especially the Black and brown community, is one key report that states that Black and brown youth hide their substance use because addiction is seen as a disease, or seen as a weakness and not a disease. And that's bad because, you know, even though they're young and they're beginning to experiment with substances, they don't understand that they are experiencing a part of arrested development, that development is being helped or paused due to their substance use. But we have to be able to have this discussion on how addiction is a disease and not a moral failing. Just because you made a mistake, that mistake doesn't identify them. It's just a moment of time of a bad decision. Misinterpretation of current treatment options also exist among Black and brown youth and their families. According to many reports, this population is not informed about the standard options for addressing opioid use disorder, reducing the chance that evidence-based engagement, it could be sought, but it may not be sought. They may not reach out to the proper people and the proper individuals that can help them to overcome some of these barriers. So the lack of cultural responsive and respectful care. It's easier for a Black and brown person to engage someone that looks, sounds, or even reflects some of their ideals. While it can be challenging to take a holistic view of an individual and see more than their substance disorder, this may even be more challenging for a Black and brown youth who's subject to implicit biases of healthcare system. Failing to bridge the racial culture divide between cultures of the provider and the person looking for services, a lot of times it results in premature termination of engagement of these youth of services that they really need. You know, while engaging in services is a difficult task for all populations. I mean, it's not easy. You know, a lot of people this has become a habit, a way of life, and it's very difficult to rehabilitate and challenge the people who are not at a position where they're ready to change. However, when the cultural context is ignored or misunderstood, the respect for that person goes way out the door. So there's little hope in providing the type of treatment that person needs. And the lack of Black and brown providers also brings another barrier because many people there's been a report by the National Institution of Drug Addiction. And this service tells us that 70% of the people who have a substance use disorder do not go through regular treatment, that they overcome their treatment through supportive services and other families and friends. However, these same people who have overcome their addiction fail to reach back and grab these youth who may be needing someone who look like them to tell them their stories to bring them along. And it becomes very difficult for Black and brown youth with opioid use disorder to engage in treatment when that happens. So our services at TYSA, our approach and strategy is aimed at reducing the risks and the harmful effects with substance use and addictive behaviors for the individual, the community, and society. Chassis provides a safe place for youth to explore, educate themselves, and engage in a non-judgmental service focusing on reducing their exposure to many of these social health deterrents. We follow the guidelines from SAMHSA by using a person-centered, trauma-informed approach. We offer counseling, medicated assisted treatment for substance use disorder, testing for HIV, Hep C, and other STDs. Chassis delivers these in an evidence-based method, which increases the Black and Brown's youth positive perception of themselves. And what this does is increase the one and reduce their usage or even increase their ability to sustain remission on a very long time, long period. Here are some of the references that we use to put this presentation together. Some very excellent reading. If you like a copy of these slides, you're more than welcome to have them. Here's my contact information. My name is Robert. Some people call me Dr. Power, but my mama called me Robert. You can call me Robert. So thank you, Sean, for this time, and I hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Dr. Power. That was great. And thanks for really reviewing the importance of this work. I'm going to hand it next to Jazzy Robinson. Jazzy, please.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Pardon me not being on camera. I had to go into the office today, so I'm on my way home from work. So please excuse my screen. Thank you, House of Beto Jamaat. Thank you to the collaborators that put this together. Jasmine and Robert, I mean, you guys were really amazing, and you touched on a lot of the issues that are impacting our Black and Brown kids and youth. So I'm honored just to be here, to be on this panel. My name is, as we know, Jasmine Robinson. I am a community activist, but I'm also the district leader of the 61st. So a district leader is basically, I'm your advocate, your ally to the elected officials. So if you are trying to get in contact with your elected officials, or you need more information or resources about the process, then you reach out to me. I am just your ally in the process. Basically, I'm not really repeat or too much of what has already been said, but I just really want to touch on a part. COVID has exacerbated a lot of the social ills that we have seen that's already existing in our Black and Brown, our BIPOC. It was already mentioned about incarceration. Just the feeling of seeing your loved ones dealing with addiction, poverty where you live. It's just all of that. And I just feel that our young people, especially our Black and Brown, are not getting necessary resources that they need. And when they do go and they seek, sometimes it is hard because, again, how we growing up, maybe getting help is not, the most acceptable thing to do. Why do you need to go and don't be telling people our business? So that too, does play a part of it. But, overall, we are in a battle here for our young people. And yes, and as Dr. Robert had said, talk about microaggression. Microaggression is very real, is very prevalent, and that does play a part in our kids, and especially here on Staten Island. We Black educators in schools and there was recently a story about an educator. I think she was at either Wagner or New Dorp High School, where she made this, she made derogatory comments on a Facebook post, and she's still allowed to be a teacher. Why? So again, it's very crucial and key that we have people that look like us, that know the battles, that to help and empower our kids, and especially going through situations like this, substance abuse. And I would just also like to point out that it is National Recovery Month, and I'm honored to be on this panel with two people on here that's on the front lines. I mean, both of you should be commended for the hard work that you're doing and really shining a light on this issue. And if there's any way for me, as an advocate, as an ally, to bolster, to help, I'm here. I'm right there in the field, because I do believe that our young kids, especially our BIPOC community, that we need all the help and resources needed to survive and to have sustainability. Also, to again, what was mentioned about just trying to get the resources, and that's key too. And we need to hold our elected officials accountable, and to make sure you want our vote, you gotta help, you gotta be, you want something for us, well, we want something for you. So that's why I think it's very, very important that we, hold our elected officials accountable, and getting the resources and getting the monies that we need, so we can have more resources for services, as Jasmine and Dr. Powers, are doing. That's what we need. We need funding. We need real funding for our communities, because if we can have funding for wars, for our defense fund, for the police, for the NYPD, we can definitely have resources for our community. So that's what I think that is needed, is more resources. Because like I said, the NYPD has a $1 billion budget. That money, it could be reallocated to services that can help impact, this opioid drug addiction crisis communities. So I don't want to take up any more time, but again, I'm just honored and happy to be here, to listen, to learn, and to, again, be an advocate, an ally, and more importantly, a friend to the movement. Thank you.
Thank you, Jazzy. Yeah. Thanks for your energy and your passion. So I just want to encourage folks, if you have a question or a concern for a family member, throw it in the chat. If maybe you'd prefer not everyone else read it, send it to me directly. But if you have a question on your mind, we have a powerful panel here, and we definitely would like to get them answered for you. I have a couple questions already in the pipeline, so I'm going to throw these out to the panel. What can we as community members do to help prevent youth opioid use? And I'll open it up to whoever would like to go first.
Jasmine, you want to go, or you want me to answer it, or?
You go first, Dr. Power. I'll go second.
Thank you. Part of this is understanding that at a certain age, that your child as a youth is more influenced by his environment than his parents or her parents. And part of that is engaging them at a place to where you kind of can, I would say, characterize the people who they're with. So as part of being a clinical counselor, a family counselor, what we recommend is that parents have an ABC system for their friends, for the children of their friends. And A friends are people that you're comfortable with, that their parents you're comfortable with their parents, and you're comfortable with your children being with these children alone. Be parents, be children is that you really don't know them, you don't know their parents, but you don't have any negative information to actually make a better decision on what those children are. So what you do is that you have these children interact in a structured environment. You say, well, instead of going over to Bobby's house, have Bobby come over here and we'll buy pizza and watch a movie, and then you can monitor their interaction. C children are children who you know have maladaptive behaviors, are demonstrating that they already are antisocial and may be already experiencing some type of drug or alcohol. Those are children that you just tell your kids that you prefer them not interact. However, if they choose to still interact, you bring them and monitor them in your house as well. Part of the opioid um, addiction crisis, addiction epidemic, I would say, is the fact that children needs supervision. They need to be known that you're a parent, that you're going to watch over them and protect them, and allow kids to be kids. Some kids don't have the luxury of that opportunity, and some situations put out kids in situations where they have to be the adult. They have to be the one taking care of their parents, picking up parents who are intoxicated or under the influence off the front lawn, bringing them home, buying food. And so part of that is it starts at home, but it also starts in our community. We have to be mindful. And when you see a child, here's the number one key. When I see a child who is taking on adult responsibilities, then that is a red flag for me. Because when I was 13 or 14, my mom wanted me to make my bed, but very rarely did I do it. My mom wanted me to do X, Y, Z, but very rarely did I do it efficiently or consistently. But when you see a child, and especially in the school system, you'll see somebody say, wow, that child is very responsible. That child is very adherent. Well, those are red flags because something is telling me that that child is learning how to become an adult without learning and experiencing childhood experiences. And it takes us to look past doing a job to doing what we're getting paid to look at the social factors of a child's life, to be able to see, what, maybe we should take a little deeper into that. Let's talk to the child, because let's face it, in the Black and brown community, we don't tell our business to people. We ain't going to tell people what's going on behind closed doors. However, it's going to take an initiative to build that rapport, to let the child know they're safe, to not to put the child at risk from being retaliated against the parent for exposing some of the parents' maladaptive behavior, and building a trauma-free, client-centered, focused environment to where they can feel safe to share. And that's all I got, Jasmine. I'm gonna leave it to you.
That was a lot. You got a lot there. And I guess I'll just add, because that was great, that we, in public health, we call this the social ecological model, right? It's like the layers that surround your child. So there are individual behaviors. There's what happens at the family level, what happens at the community level, then like the environmental and policy level, right? So there are risk and protective factors that can happen at all of those different levels. So like Dr. Power was saying, like being around kids that have are already showing antisocial behaviors, like that's like in that tight inner circle, right? But also not like feeling connected to your community, not having someone at school that you can talk to. Maybe your child identifies as LGBTQ and that intersects with race, and that makes it even harder for them to do things in life, right? So those are some risk factors, but then those protective factors are communicating with your kid, having something tangible for them to hold on to, like connection to a community center, a church, a sport, an activity, like feeling connected to something. Connectedness is so important. It's a demonstrated protective factor for substance use issues. Also, Dr. Pryor said this too, but this idea that we view sometimes like 14 and 15 and 16 and 17 and 18-year-olds as fully grown adults, and they are not. That's when as adults, like as parents, we start to let them go and say they're mature, they can make their own decisions. Does anyone know when brains are fully developed? Anybody know? Put it in the chat. Dr. Power knows, PhD, Dr. 24, 25, right? So we view our like teenagers as adults. Their brains cannot do the things that we want them to do, right? They can't make informed decisions, like rational decisions. Their brains can't do it. It's not to infantilize them. It's just they need our support. They need us to help them identify what's a good situation, what's a bad situation. They need to learn positive coping skills. They need to learn how to navigate the world. So they need their parents to help them do that. And then there are also a bunch of things that can happen at some of those other levels, right? Like we do a lot of work with like physicians and folks about prescribing medication. So you probably heard about like telling doctors about, hey, you shouldn't give opioids out for every single injury that happens, right? Because they're highly addictive, things like that. Also things like storing alcohol and cannabis and prescription drugs in your own house, right? Like people drink, people smoke, those are facts of life. But if those things are just available in your home for your kids to have access to, kids experiment and that can become a substance use issue. So just being aware, having conversations, helping your kids navigate life is important. You're not helicoptering them, you're providing a supportive environment for them to be able to thrive.
Great, thank you both. And I'm just gonna quickly show those risk and protective factors that we mentioned. So you'll see there are many at each level, at the youth level, within the family level, among their peers or at that school level, and then in the wider community. I'll just keep that up for a second while I tee up the next question. Our next question, what services are available for youth that are using opioids or other drugs? What services are available?
Are you asking, you want me to go again?
Please start us off, Dr. Power, if you'd like.
In the Staten Island community, there's several services available for youth. Chassis has a club next step program, which is 24 hours. They can go down there, they can speak to a peer, they could talk about what's going on. Camelot Counseling also has a clubhouse for youth. There's no requirement to join the clubhouse. It's open. They can go there, do their homework, go home, eat dinner, go back to the clubhouse. And these are all safe opportunities for these children to engage and not be exposed to the environment that would encourage them to use. Because let's face it, peer pressure is real. And if you see your peer do something, if I'm associated with that peer, I want to be included. I want to have that connectedness. And part of being connected is that we do the same thing. And if I'm not doing the same thing, I may not feel that connectedness with my peer. However, if we're all going to the clubhouse, we're all going to play videos at the clubhouse, we're all going the next step, and we're all going to another place, and we're playing ping pong and pool and video games. And, that in itself is a connectedness to where it's a healthy peer engagement. And at the same time, you have people there that's going to protect them from the things that's out there on the streets. There's also, for those youth that may be beyond that and may need a higher level of care, there's several adolescent programs that have residential care where they can go in and learn the coping skills that they need to engage in life. Because what we found is that most youth that use based on not knowing how to deal with emotions. We also found, and this is in a study, that the number one lead to addiction is gaming. That gaming produces the same environment as addiction. It starts off as a social event, but it leads to isolation, individualism, and it doesn't give the child an opportunity to learn the social skills to navigate life. So when they feel embarrassment, when they feel upset, when they feel all these difficult emotions because they've been gaming and not socializing, they have to those feelings as adults, we learn how to deal with those feelings. But children don't have those skills. So they go to the next thing. And the next thing is alcohol or drug. And the drugs and alcohol give them the effects of relieving those anxieties and those uncomfortable feelings that they deal with. So those are part of the things. Um, there's also trying to think of it. Oh my Lord, just slipped my mind talking so much. But there's many resources. Oasis, New York State Oasis has a website that you can actually go there and they'll give you not only outpatient, but harm reduction. Harm reduction is another part of the process for them. They don't have to be committed to go into a structured treatment environment, but they can come and speak to a harm reduction counselor, tell them how they can do certain things until they're prepared to ready to stop. You know, our thing is let's make them safe, let's educate them. I'd rather give them a condom than them go out there and catch AIDS. I'd rather give them a clean needle than them go out there and catch AIDS or some other disease, hepatitis C or whatever it is. So I'm sorry, Jasmine. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Robert. Go ahead, Jasmine.
I don't think I have much to add except that the hallmark, I think, of a good like therapist or program is that it's person centered and that they are responsive to your child's needs. Like Dr. Brown went through all the different types, right? There's inpatient, there's outpatient. Depending on what substance you're using, you can go to detox, you can do a private therapist. Different things work for different people. So there's no one pathway. That's why if your kid needs support or you need support, it's a connecting with someone and talking through those options with them and really understanding what your options are is really important. And like Dr. Power said, there's a lot of different places on and off Staten Island that you can go to. We have a website for TYSA that has all of the OASA, so that's the state licensed substance use treatment programs here, so you can navigate them that way.
Oh, and I'm sorry, and I just want to add this, that in addition to, or just further support what both panelists had said, if one source of recovery is not, beneficial to you, you can always find another source. Some you may not rock with, or gel or be able to connect with a therapist. You don't have to stay in that situation. And if that therapist, if that counselor is not the right one for you, do not be afraid to say that, this person is not working for me. They're not relating to me. They're not helping me. And it's okay for you to go and seek other help. And I think it's very key and very crucial that we use our voices to say what we need and what we want and what we, especially in the medical field, because there is a lot of bias towards Black and Brown, especially towards Black women and towards our youth. So I think that it's very important to say, what, and if we don't feel a certain program is the right program for us, we're not getting the need, you can always find another source, another revenue to get help that you deserve. You don't have to, suffer in silence. And that's just basically what I wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yes. Okay. We have 2 questions left and about 9 minutes or so.
Sean, and I do want to
Please.
say there's a question in the chat. So maybe we do that one before our other.
Sure. So we have a question about safe injection sites. and overdose prevention centers. Sounds like the viewer wants more information about how those work. Who'd like to start us up and explain, talk a little bit about safe injection sites and overdose prevention centers?
I'll go so quick, and I think Dr. Power, you can do this better than I can, but I'll start as a public health person. So safe injection sites or overdose prevention centers, which I think is a bit more of like a palatable name. That's why they're changing what they call it, right? It's a public health strategy to keep people alive, right? So in other countries, there's demonstrated spaces where they have medical professionals supervising people injecting substances and monitoring them, and then people can go back out. There's been a lot of backlash. So folks remember in the last 2 or 3 years in New York City, they were talking about them at the city level. There was a whole feasibility study that was conducted. There's a lot of outrage. People were like, it's going to increase crime. It's going to increase all of these different things. We know that it does reduce overdose, again, because people are there, they have naloxone on site, they're monitoring it. It's controversial. In some of the places where it's been happening and people have gone to visit, they haven't really seen increases in crime, but it's one of those, I'm going to use the word controversial again, more controversial strategies, but a potentially effective public health strategy. When we think about young people, though, it would not be youth, right? That might be in the young adult range because it would be 18 and over. If you're under 18, you wouldn't be able to access that level of site. And Dr. Power, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Jess. So we here at Chassis, we have that. Actually, I am the director of that program. And part of that is studies have shown that actually crime has went down as well as overdose and the transmission of other chronic health conditions such as AIDS, STDs, Hep C, and other diseases. Prior to coming to Chassis, I was from the proponent of total abstinence. What I've learned since I've been here is that harm reduction works. And it works because it comes from a person-centered strategy. And part of this strategy is that it allows a person the autonomy to dictate their lives and gives them the freedom to choose when they're ready to go into remission. Our job is to encourage them to try remission, but however, if they're not ready to try remission, we're here to provide them a safe way to preserve their life so that when they are ready, they will have that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. So our final question as we prepare to wrap, perhaps a big question. What can behavioral health agencies do to better serve Black and Brown youth? And hopefully all of our panelists have some thoughts, but hopefully we can get just quick nutshell, minute or two from each of you. Jazzy, please start us up.
As I always will say and continue to say, that we need to have more Black.
You're muted. Please continue. You left off at we need to have more.
Important for us to be a part of these conversations and also to be available to help our kids. We need more, and we need more Black and Brown counselors, more Black and Brown facilitators to help our kids, because I think that is the way that is going to really combat and help our youth. Thank you. So basically what I'm saying is we need more Jasmine Riveras. We need more Dr. Robert Powers. That's what we need. Thank you.
I'll go next. Oh, Oh, but we need more of you, Jazzy, as advocates, seriously, because these issues often are ones that people feel like are in their silo. Like you can only talk about it if you do treatment or if you know about it, and substance use affects everyone. So it's important for everyone to know. I think that, again, I couldn't have said it better, right? That this idea that having people who look like you, who you can connect with, who have a similar experience, shared experience is so important. So diversifying the counselors on Staten Island is important. Again, this idea that Jazzy already said, like, you can fire your person, right? Like, just because you get saddled with a therapist, that doesn't mean you have to stay with them. It's a relationship. You have to be able to work together. You have to, a therapeutic relationship is a relationship. So that's important. And then I would also say, trauma-informed care is necessary, and it's not that Black and brown communities are traumatized, it's just the reality of how systems and structures are set up that aren't for us, right? It's like there has been a lot of trauma that's happened, and we're moving more towards this idea of healing-centered engagement. Like, how do we have healing-centered therapeutic environments? How do we have people understand culture and let you show up as yourself and be responsive to that is so crucial. So diversifying the workforce, healing-centered engagement, and then a little more love in the world too, I think would help support some of this stuff as well.
That was very well said, Jazz and Jazz. I'm going to say this, and I want the panel and the people here to remember this: that 90% of the counseling techniques, theories, ideals were developed by middle-aged white men who were measuring white families. They did not take in the complexities of civil rights, slavery, and other issues in the Black community. And by having more, as Ms. Robinson says, by having more counselors that look like you, understand your plight, understand what it means to get stopped by a cop, understand what it means that you can't go down certain blocks, understand the barriers that come in knowing that certain colors may get you killed. Those little nuances mean a lot because those build the therapeutic relationships and allow the counselor to enter into the counselee's life and allows the counselee to know that he has somebody that he can travel down the road with safely and not be judged or felt less than a person. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you to Robert, Jasmine, and Jazzy for sharing with us this evening. I hope we answered all of your questions. If any of the panelists would like to make their emails available, I'd encourage you to put them in the chat for folks. Otherwise, I'm going to put my email into the chat. If folks have, if a question comes to you after we wrap, reach out to me and we'll get your question answered. We have our website, which I'm putting into the chat, has local resources on it. You can also follow us on social media at TYSA Network. We're on IG, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. Thank you once again to our panelists. Thank you to folks watching from home or in the car. And thank you for being committed to this work because it really takes all of us to tackle these complex issues. So have a good evening. Thanks again. And we hope to have you at one of our next sessions.
Thank you guys for
Good night.
inviting us. Good night.
Thank you very much. Excellent job. Excellent job.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all.